friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. And today I am bringing to you another topic that came to me via the internet, just out of left field, and I became instantly very interested in what was going on here.
The internet's good for that.
It is. Hopefully we don't lose TikTok, because that's bringing me 90% of our episode topics these days. But today I want to talk about a lighthouse.
Oh.
So we're going to specifically talk about a lighthouse that is perched on a desolate rock off the coast of Oregon, the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse, which is often now referred to as Terrible Tilly.
Oh.
Yes.
All right.
Has a reputation of being one of the most haunted lighthouses in America. But what about it makes it so spooky? Well, let us uncover the tales that lurk beneath the surface, shall we?
Yes, please.
So in 1878, the Tillamook Rock, which is a chunk of basalt rock off the coast of the Tillamook Head in Oregon, was selected as kind of an unlikely location for a lighthouse in hopes of causing what am I trying to say? Not dispersing, but like dissipating the area's growing reputation as the graveyard of the Pacific.
Ooh.
Yeah, lots of shipwrecks happening off this coast, and so they wanted to get a good lighthouse situation out here to protect as many ships as they could.
Seems wise.
Sure. But it wasn't.
Spoiler alert.
Spoilers, y'all. It was not wise. From her very inception, Tilly was extremely troubled. A popular urban legend in the area said that local indigenous tribes considered that chunk of island cursed by their gods and filled with souls of evil spirits.
All right.
So yeah, right from the start, Tillamook Rock.
Not a strong start. Not a strong start.
And she did little to prove the legends wrong right from the get-go. So they sent out first a master mason to survey that location. But upon trying to disembark his boat, he was swept out to sea and never found.
Oh.
So again, right out the gate, not great.
No. You can't start with sweeping people out to sea.
Not a great first impression, Tilly. And the sea conditions that made it necessary for a lighthouse to be built on Tillamook Head were just notoriously brutal, so much so that they could not even find local workers to partake in the construction of the lighthouse. Because they knew that
they're like, nah.
Yeah, I mean, they knew it was more or less a suicide mission. And so once they get a new master mason assigned to this project, he had to hire workers from outside the area and sequester them at, I shit you not, this is the name, Cape Disappointment.
My vacation home.
Yes. I've frequented that Cape.
I spent many summers at Cape Disappointment.
But they sequestered them out there so that they wouldn't hear any of the media reports about what had been happening already on the rock, sure. As well as local stories of, superstitions and what have you, so that they wouldn't get too scared to work on the project. The crews lived in rotating shifts on the rock, and there were so many casualties that men waiting on shore to work were also sequestered, often being taken out on ships just offshore to wait for their rotation to keep them from fleeing when they heard about how many people were dying working on this project.
Seems like a great gig.
Yeah, like overall, I'm like, at what point were they like,
maybe not.
Maybe I'm sensing that we've made an error. Sure. So throughout the 500 days of Tilly's construction, incidents plagued the crew that was on the rock. This location was not only like very perilous to access in the first place, but was also susceptible to very large storms. And in January of 1880, 4 months into the construction, a storm sent a huge wave full of loose rock crashing over the work site, injuring several workers and sweeping all of the crew's tools, water, and food provisions out to sea. One thing about this rock, it loves to sweep shit out to
Right.
sea.
I'm gonna say we're just gonna be sweeping shit out to sea.
Yeah. Now, according to records, like historical records from this, all the workers survived this. I'm like, would they have reported it though?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
It's like,
it
I
doesn't
feel
seem
like maybe there's not like the most if one of our tactics is like let's keep people on boats so they don't
right.
know, so they can't run away when they find out people are dying, they don't seem like they'd be super forthright.
No, it doesn't seem like honesty is the policy here
No.
at Tillamook Head. Um, but they supposedly survived, but they were stranded for over 2 weeks waiting for new food and supplies to show up because the seas out to the rock were so treacherous that nobody could access them. Then, just weeks before the completion of the lighthouse in January of 1881, a ship called the Lupatia wrecked in a heavy fog and killed all 16 of the crew members aboard, who were found the next morning washed up on Tilly's shore.
Oof.
Yeah. And again, this is just like right before this lighthouse is finished, which is so disappointing. Like, Alexa, play Alanis Morissette. Isn't that ironic?
For sure.
Alexa, never mind.
It worked.
Keep that in. That's hilarious.
I'm definitely keeping that in.
So as the construction crew finished the project, there were a lot of stories about seeing the phantom Lupatia floating offshore in the distance. Also, the only survivor of that shipwreck was the crew's dog, which,
Aw.
good job, dog. We're so
Good
proud of
job.
you. But there's also kind of a local legend that you can hear a dog howling off Tillamook Rock,
Aw.
waiting for his crew to come back. So you would think, with all of this, before Tilly was even in action, would have been a loud enough warning to keep humans off of the death rock, you know?
One would think.
You would think, but unfortunately that was not the case. So they start setting the light keepers out to the rock. 4 men at a time were posted, living in a 45 by 80 house. But for shorter than typical rotations for lighthouse keepers, they were 42 days on and 21 days off. But even with a more abbreviated work schedule and longer land breaks, the isolation and hard conditions of this particular lighthouse proved extremely challenging, even for the most seasoned lighthouse keepers.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not familiar with lighthouse situations, because why would you be?
I was gonna say I know some things about lighthouses, but
right,
maybe we should let the people know about lighthouses.
If you're not Penny,
growing up on the coast of Lake Michigan, there's lighthouse stuff going on.
Sure. So most lighthouses have a land bridge of sorts or some way of accessing them without getting on a boat.
Yep.
This is not the case with Tilly. She is almost 2 miles offshore and completely like an island, like we said at the beginning of the episode. So that's not typical. So a lot of the keepers who were brought to this lighthouse, a lot of them were Navy men or, you know, associated with the military complex in some way. And they were kind of thinking like, oh, I'm getting like a sweet gig being posted out at this lighthouse. And then they would get there and they'd be like, okay, let's get on the boat. And they're like, why can't we access it by land? What do you mean? So even for people who were familiar with lighthouse keeping, were like really shocked by the particular conditions of this.
Yeah, especially remote.
Yes, very, very remote. And as we've mentioned, constant storms.
just being swept out to the sea at any point in time.
Constant storms. The whole reason we needed a lighthouse out here is because of how bad the storms and the waves are. And often you can find videos of this online. It's really horrifying, honestly. These giant waves that will crash up on Tillamook Rock and will go up over 100 feet over the top of the lighthouse itself.
Oh, do not like that.
Right. And I mean, if you've ever been like hit even by a small wave, you know how powerful
Yeah.
water can be.
Mhm.
So it's getting smashed day in and day out by these giant 100-foot waves. It would rock the lighthouse that in a way that felt like constant earthquakes, according to the keepers. And again, this area is really densely fogged all the time, so there's
Yeah.
foghorns blaring day in and day
You know,
out.
the soothing
The
tones of
soothing,
foghorn.
dulcet tones of a foghorn, which made it nearly impossible for these keepers to get any rest. This is like my neurodivergent ass could never, like, this
No.
is
Uh-uh.
overstimulation station. Just like constant shaking and
Right.
loud horns.
Shaking, water, horns. It's like,
Yeah,
"What?"
moist, wet, like you're in a 40 by 80 box with three other people you
3
don't
other
know.
dudes
Yeah, like
for 42
for
days at a
42 days at
time?
a
Ugh.
time, like absolutely not. Like go lighthouse keepers, because couldn't
Right,
be
'cause
me.
I feel like normally when you, like, imagine a lighthouse, you're like, "Oh,
Oh,
it's
how
just
quaint.
it's me, the lighthouse keeper, in my sweet little private lighthouse."
Yeah,
And it seems like it would be nice for that, but not this one.
yeah, no.
Not
And
Tilly.
definitely not Tilly. And I don't remember, are we about to get into that? Let's see. I think
Ooh,
so. Oh no, not quite. But we're gonna
okay.
get into what you imagine versus what the truth was here. Um, but yes, so because it was so dangerous to even get out to Tillamook Rock, let alone try to land on it, they had to use a giant winch to bring supplies and personnel from ships to the rock, which that added a level of danger all by itself, even under the best conditions. So they have this this object called a breeches buoy,
Okay.
which is essentially a giant pair of pants encircled by a flotation ring attached to cables that are up on the like top of the rock,
Mhm.
and they would put the men in these giant pants and like hoist them up to the rock. And several men were injured or lost just doing this, trying to get them onto the rock in the first
Oof.
place. And to add insult to injury, unlike many lighthouses, again, due to the extreme conditions, which earned the lighthouse the name Terrible Tilly, the keepers were not allowed to bring their families.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, yes, like what Penny was saying, when you picture a lighthouse keeper, it's kind of like, oh, this quaint little thing where I'm keeping my lighthouse and my wife and my children are
Mhm.
here and we're in this cute little rock on the coast of Maine and everything's sweet and nice.
Yeah.
um, this was not the case at Tilly
No.
at all. Women, that I found several things was interesting. They kept talking about how women were not allowed on the rock at all.
Mhm.
But then I found a really interesting article. I didn't include that in this episode because that could have been a whole thing in itself. But a really interesting article just about all the women who have been on Tilly and like,
Yeah. Ooh.
um, yeah. So that's a really interesting thing all in itself.
Bonus content if people wanna
Yeah, if
learn
you want
about
to
that.
if you want to look that up, there's a whole thing about like the women of Tilly. Um, but as a rule, these men were out there by themselves, and most of them had families on the shore. So that intense isolation, especially with this particular lighthouse being in the middle of the ocean, the reports of insanity were common, and many men got dismissed from this post.
Mhm.
There was one keeper that reportedly went insane and tried to kill another keeper by putting ground glass in his food.
Whoop.
Yeah.
Although I do okay, so that does sound like legitimately like a thing, but I'm also kind of like, if I was a man who was on this lighthouse rock,
Hmm.
I feel like I would be like, "Whoa, uh-oh, I'm feeling a little bit crazy. All
Oh,
these foghorns, you better send me back to land. I shouldn't stay here
I
anymore.
can't be
I
trusted.
can't be trusted. Uh-oh."
Yes, and we'll get even more into that in a minute, because there's a lot of things at play here with the
Yes.
the insanity clause. Um, but of course, where there is isolation and reports of insanity, there are also ghost stories. Many
Ooh.
people believe that Terrible Tilly is haunted by the ghosts of her previous keepers. Specifically, there are lots of accounts that mention two spirits in particular, one malicious and one friendly. And the friendly spirit is said to protect the lighthouse because he loved it so much. Whereas
Weird.
yeah, like, okay, crazy.
All right, bro.
But then the malicious spirit is said to attack any new keeper that comes to relieve him of his post.
Mm.
I watched an interview with a previous keeper named Jim Gibbs, and he was just 25 years old when he was assigned to Tillamook Rock. And he had several stories of his own, including hearing a whispering moan one night in the keeper's quarters. And he assumed that one of his fellow keepers was having a nightmare or was sick or something. So he followed the sound and was supposedly led to a door that he had not noticed before.
Mm.
And when he opened it, he found a library and was drawn to pick up a book that happened to be the account of another lighthouse keeper in the Caribbean who had experienced similar a similar story to what he was going through in that moment
Mhm.
at Tillamook Rock. Spooky.
Spooky.
Another spooky tale from the lighthouse comes from a keeper who this is kind of a almost spooky. So this keeper felt something brush against his face while he was lying in bed in the dark.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden he heard strange footsteps and he bolted upright, runs for the light switch. He's like swinging his arms in front of him, trying to attempt to like smack whatever is,
Mhm.
is in
Yeah.
the room with him. And he turns on the light and found an injured bird that had somehow
Oh.
found its way into his bedroom. And the off kilter footstep sound was the sound of its broken wings smacking on the
Flapping.
floor.
Oh, poor bird.
But you could see how being out
Oh
there would
yeah.
get the
Oh yeah.
best of you.
You'd be feeling pretty jumpy.
Right. So yeah, I want to pause here and address just an interesting tidbit because there is a lot of lore around just like lighthouse keepers going mad,
Yeah.
not just at Tilly. That's very ubiquitous across like
Mhm.
lighthouse
Definitely.
stuff. And I watched a really interesting video from Kaz Rowe, which, if you like our podcast, you would really enjoy Kaz's videos.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah, Kazrowe. Lots of fascinating, like weird dark history stuff. But they did a video specifically about why so many keepers had mental health struggles besides
Mhm.
like the obvious of isolation and all
Yeah.
that. Um, but obviously the lighthouse, the light needs to be able to spin around. And there were a lot of issues making this smooth and functional when they first started building the lighthouses until around 1890 when they started using a bath of mercury to minimize resistance.
Hey! Perfect. That couldn't
Two,
have any problems associated with it.
not at all, 200 pounds of liquid
Ooh.
mercury that the lighthouse keepers maintained and handled and spent hours in an enclosed space with. Is this sounding familiar, Penny?
Great. Ah.
Something to the tune of things that used to be used as medicine but
Right.
definitely aren't safe for the human body.
Everybody.
Yeah, so after the implementation of this mercury bath system, there was an increased number of lighthouse keepers having
That makes
hallucinations,
sense.
exhibiting strange and erratic behavior. There was a report of one man like entering the keeper's quarters naked and swinging an axe.
Ooh.
And unfortunately, several keepers taking their own lives as
Yeah.
well. And you know, everybody's like, I don't know, it's crazy. All of a
Weird.
sudden, all, all these keepers started going crazy. So, of course, now with modern science, we believe this was due to mercury poisoning.
Hey.
But whether it was isolation or the mercury or what have you, there
A
are.
little bit of both.
Oh,
¿Por qué no las
por qué
dos?
no las dos? Exactly. But there were many, many ghost stories over the 77 years that Tilly ran as a lighthouse. But perhaps the most macabre twist is still to come. So, due to improved ship technology for navigation, and the fact that Tilly's conditions just made her incredibly expensive to operate and very dangerous, she was decommissioned in 1957.
Ah.
And then, after several failed ownerships, in 1980, Tilly fell into the hands of realtors Mimi Morset and Kathy Riley, who converted it into their Eternity at Sea columbarium.
Mm.
Which, if you do not know, a columbarium is a storage house for cremated human remains.
Oh.
So during their operation, they amassed a collection of 30 urns that were, quote, buried at eternity at sea. But then the Oregon Mortuary and Cemetery Board took away their license in 1999. So this has been an ongoing controversy as the families of those at rest on Tillamook Rock believe that they were not given an honest portrayal of how their family remains would be taken care of,
Hmm.
which obviously is a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Mimi Morset says that when Eternity at Sea started selling spaces in the columbarium, they hadn't realized that the metal that they were using to house the urns could not withstand a maritime environment.
Ew.
But the state mortuary board says that the owners have not kept accurate records of the people placed there, and that the urns are just sitting on concrete blocks, not in
Sure.
niches. And so the lighthouse does not even qualify as a columbarium because the whole thing of that is like almost like a mausoleum, right? Like there's
Yeah.
niches that are protected and you know exactly whose ashes are where and
Yeah.
whatnot. They unfortunately did not provide that.
Just a lighthouse full of urns.
Just a lighthouse full of 30 human remains. Uh, in an interview with the New York Times in 2007, when she was asked about the concerns that the current urns are not well protected, Ms. Morset said that people ask me, what if a tsunami hits the lighthouse? And I tell every person that their second choice better be to be buried at sea.
I mean, rude, but true.
Yeah. I don't know about Miss Mimi.
No, I don't approve of that, but it is kind of it's definitely a snarky comeback.
Yeah. Is she part of the Stark family?
Maybe.
So while the columbarium obviously is no longer in operation, Miss Morset has retained ownership of the lighthouse and the remains inside, minus two urns that were unfortunately stolen by vandals in 1991. Um, but though she has listed the lighthouse for sale for $6.5 million in 2022, it is still currently
No,
on the
no, no
market.
one, no one's biting on the on this horrible cursed lighthouse.
I know.
Weird.
So strange. Um, yeah, so it is still kind of up in the air about what will happen to the remains of those on board if the lighthouse sells. But I don't foresee that happening anytime in the near future.
Yeah.
Tilly is currently, nor will she likely ever be open to the public. And the only way currently to access the island today is by helicopter. So
I'm just laughing because I was literally thinking the entire time you were telling me about like the crazy breaches and stuff. I was like, man, life would be so much easier if helicopters had been invented.
yeah, yes, yeah. No, they couldn't get out there,
Didn't have those.
or they didn't want to. Like, because I mean, she was in operation until the 50s. Um, I don't know at what point they stopped taking people by boat and were like,
Yeah,
hey,
that's
this
true.
seems really bad. Like, we're losing a lot of men in the water and the breaches. But yeah, I'm realizing this. I felt like I had so much information. I'm like, this is kind of a very, very short episode.
No,
Uh,
not really. I mean, it's a normal length episode.
but I thought this was so interesting. It's something I never heard about before. If you are a person who resides off the Oregon coast and I mean, you can see this lighthouse from the coast still. Like you
Hmm.
can view it. So that's um, a lot of, which again I feel is so like, what's the word? Not passe. Like I don't know, just so flippant. Like
Yeah.
Mimi Morissette was like, "Well, yeah, you can't visit them, but you can come to the coast and like stare at the lighthouse and know that
That's
you're."
why I was like, as you were describing this, I'm like, obviously, everyone has their own choices for what they want to do with
Right.
their death, but I'm kind of like, I'm like, what is the thought process behind I'd really like my loved ones' remains to be in a horrible lighthouse that I can't get to?
Yes, and what's interesting too, so now part of the kind of problem, I guess, I don't mean to say problem, but like the unique situation surrounding the lighthouse as far as like selling it and what have you, is that it's actually a protected nature sanctuary now.
Ooh,
Because since it's off the coast so far and it's kind of undisturbed because you can't really get to it, that nature has kind of taken it back, and so it's
sure.
become a breeding ground for sea lions. Um,
Aw,
yeah, as well as there are several types of like endangered bird, like maritime bird species that have taken up root in the lighthouse.
yeah, breaking in and bothering lighthouse keepers in the middle of the night.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's protected now because that's like it's helping nature
Yeah.
repopulate, which is awesome. But also I'm like, yeah, these people's families are like in there amongst birds like nest and bird poop everywhere, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Uh
Sea lions doing it.
yeah, talk about foghorns.
Yeah, it's probably pretty noisy.
But I know Mimi Morissette did say that part of the proceeds of her like sale that she would be allotting, I think like 10% or something of that to whoever purchased it to help like fund cleaning and refurbishing of the lighthouse. Um, but I don't know like how much they can really do now
Yeah,
that
I kind of feel like maybe Tilly being retaken by nature is the correct
yeah,
path right
I
now.
don't think Tilly was ever meant to be uh I don't think that was ever
No.
supposed to be there.
Yeah,
Nature has made it
seems
pretty
like
clear.
yeah, the sea and nature were like, actually
Better
no.
not.
Actually, I don't think so. No people, please.
But, yeah, if you live, off the Oregon coast and you have gotten to view this lighthouse, I would love to hear if you have any stories about it. It's interesting, like, in researching, there's both, like, a lot of articles about it, but then it's all kind of the same information, so it
Yeah.
seems like there's a lot of, I don't know, kinda, like, missing pieces in the history of this, um, but it is really fascinating to me, and I thought, uh, what an interesting, spooky little location that most people wouldn't think to visit. Well,
Yeah.
visit from
Well,
afar.
yeah, to to ponder.
To sit on the shore and
Yes.
ponder.
We invite you to ponder.
We take a road trip, ponder. Well, thank you all so much for listening today. If you are enjoying Ghouls Night In and you would like to let us know, the best way to do that is to leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen. Now, we know a lot of you cannot leave reviews where you listen, so you can always send that to us in an Instagram DM. But I believe that Penny has an Apple podcast review to share with us today.
I certainly do. This 5-star review comes from Ghoul Friend Next Door, and is titled Fave Podcast Ever. She says, Penny and Midge have me cracking up with literally every single episode. I love learning all the new things they share that I hadn't heard of. Any boring chore is now so much more bearable if I'm listening to Ghouls Night In. So cozy, so spooky, and such a good time.
Thank you, girlfriend.
Thank you. I hope that this is a new thing you haven't heard of.
Yeah.
You got to enjoy
Take
a
your
little Tilly time with every tour you're doing.
just, just take your Tilly facts to the next office party.
Yes.
Well, if you would like to follow along with the podcast, see some photos of Miss Tilly, you can follow us on Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you are looking for me, you can find me across the web at Midge Munster.
And if you are looking for me, you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Goodbye.
goodbye.